Donald Trump has come up with a new plan regarding Iran, and to put it mildly, it's surprising. The war between the US and Iran has been halted for a reason. On Friday, Trump cancelled plans for a massive attack on Iran, which he himself had talked about the day before. And instead of bombings, Washington is now betting on a different weapon: sanctions and a naval blockade. The reason for this turnaround, widely discussed by the American press, is simple and unpleasant for Donald Trump. America is running out of ammunition. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, directly warned the US president about the critical strain on air defense interceptor stockpiles. And now American officials are openly stating the main point: sanctions can hit Iran much harder than bombs. And some add, maybe there was no need to resort to bombing at all if the sanctions are that terrifying. This sanctions campaign even got a code name: Operation Economic Fury. That's a reference to Epic Fury. In this episode, we'll take a closer look at why Trump hit the brakes in this war, what Washington plans to replace the bombings with, whether it will work, and why all of this is so concerning. By the way, it directly concerns Ukraine. My name is Alexei Pechi. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're moving toward the milestone of 300,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate your subscription. So, for several days now, US bombings of Iran have been on pause. Back on Friday, July 24, Trump said in an interview with Axios that he was considering a massive attack on Iran and was close to making such a decision. But over the weekend, he suddenly changed those plans. According to his own account, which he gave on Monday, the reason was a request from mediators not to go to war. We've heard this somewhere before. Quote from Trump: "Everyone involved in contacts with Iran asked me not to shoot." Well, in his opinion, the Iranians definitely want to make some kind of deal. In general, everything goes in cycles, and we've been through this before. Trump has already claimed that he stopped bombings or changed his mind about his ultimatums, supposedly because allies in the Middle East, particularly the Gulf countries, asked him to. But actually, later, these monarchs stated directly, "What are you talking about? We didn't ask anyone for anything." But behind this diplomatic version, there's another real reason for this pause. As reported by the New York Times, Trump postponed the strikes amid concerns about weapons stockpiles. The decision followed a warning from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane. He warned the US president about the strain on American weapons stockpiles in the US Central Command's area of responsibility, especially on the stockpiles of air defense interceptors. But the commander of that very Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, recommended stopping the bombings around the Hormuz Strait altogether because the campaign had reached the limit of its effectiveness. As he put it, there's simply nothing left to hit. The White House publicly denies the claim of an ammunition shortage. But what to make of this information in light of another statement from Trump today is up to you. Because today, Trump stated with a straight face that the United States of America has complete 100% control over the Hormuz Strait and that the Iranians are being forced to flee from this region. He says, yes, the Iranians can of course mine or attack something, but the Hormuz Strait is under the full control of the United States of America. But in reality, for some reason, tankers and ships still aren't passing through it. The question is, what does this control actually provide? And here some people have already stated that Trump stopped the war to keep oil prices in check, which have once again gone above $100 per barrel. Supposedly this was a clever plan. He saw that oil prices were rising, so he announces a pause, prices drop sharply, and basically Trump did a good job. And here, it's probably worth noting the pattern of what's happening, so that those who talk like that can see the reality. This is not the first pause by Donald Trump in this war. He has announced such ceasefires before. In March, in April, in June, Each time he promised a complete and final settlement, and each time he declared that Iran had already capitulated, that Iran agreed to the deal, but every time the fighting resumed. So this current lull is more of another pause, not the end of the war, because the main issue still remains completely unresolved. But Donald Trump really needs a break. Meanwhile, Washington has decided to switch to a new strategy, and this is where things get really interesting. American officials now believe that sanctions can hurt Iran much more than bombs. The economic pressure campaign has been given the internal name Operation Epic Economic Fury. The slip of the tongue isn't accidental. Early in the war, Trump said this is a special military operation called Epic Fury. And now they have economic fury. The Trump administration, as part of its renewed maximum pressure campaign, has already imposed sanctions on more than 1,000 individuals, ships, and aircraft. These measures target Iran's oil trade, the shadow banking system, arms purchases, and shipping networks. And now, an American official told Axios something that might explain the overall logic behind the White House's actions. Quote, "Intelligence reports that Iranians are complaining that they can't pay their fighters. Why? Because of financial pressure, because of our treasury, because of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's actions. They are facing the threat of bank runs on Iranian banks. In this huge oil-rich country, there is a gasoline shortage. They fear the U.S. Treasury more than the Department of Defense." That's what this film is about. This is the essence of the new strategy. Iran, which has a fuel shortage in its own oil-rich state and the threat of a banking panic, according to the Americans, fears a financial blow more than missiles. So the logic is that now the United States is counting on a revolt inside Iran, and that soldiers without money won't fight and the people will storm the banks. Well, to somehow withdraw cash, because the idea is that the banking system should collapse completely. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt summed it up, and here's the quote. "President Trump prefers a diplomatic solution, but keeps all options on the table if Iran continues terrorist activities in the Strait of Hormuz or against allies. Combined with successful sanctions that have undermined Iran's economy and 13 consecutive days of strikes, it would be wise for Iran to work towards a negotiated deal, otherwise they don't know what might happen." But such a strategy also has a dangerous downside for the United States. A second American official admitted to Axios directly, quote, "Sanctions and a naval blockade will take much longer to force Tehran to the negotiating table than a full-scale bombing campaign, which Trump has so far refused to authorize. And this prolonged timeline could deepen the political problems for the Republicans. They will have to defend an unpopular war and high gas prices all the way up to the midterm elections. And the numbers here are against Donald Trump and his Republican Party. The Hill reports that the price of gasoline in the United States is about 60 cents higher than at the same time during the same period in 2024, that is, under Joe Biden. On average, the price is now $4.11 per gallon. This is the average price across America. Well, the average electricity bills for the first 5 months of 2026 turned out to be about 12% higher than the previous year. So, the war is hitting Americans' wallets right before the congressional elections. At the same time, CNN, in its analytical review, lays out Trump's options and shows why each of them is bad. The first option is to extend the economic blockade of Iranian ports in order to choke off funding for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The downside is that this will take weeks, if not months. And it still might not change Tehran's position, because Tehran has faced sanctions for 40 years, and in response, Iran will most likely resume attacks on tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, which will drive prices up again and increase political pressure in the US. And the second option is to try to revive the failed ceasefire memorandum But Tehran will not agree until it gets what it started all this for, the right to regulate and monetize passage through the Strait of Hormuz. How is Iran reacting to the new White House strategy? Well, Iran is pointedly acting as if it hasn't lost anything. First of all, Iran publicly denies holding talks with the Americans. Trump literally said on Monday that Tehran requested a meeting to discuss a future deal. And on the same day, the spokesperson for Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ismail Baghai, denied this, saying, "We are not negotiating with the Americans at all." He insists that the third-party talks are only being held with Oman and concern exclusively the security of passage through the Strait of Hormuz, not a deal with America. Secondly, the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. According to official data, only 7 ships passed through the strait on Sunday, and importantly, all of them used the northern Iranian route. That means Iran's demands are working, and the US can't do anything about it. Still, let me repeat once again. Today, Donald Trump announced that the Strait of Hormuz is under the full control of the United States of America. He said, "Don't believe those Iranians. The Americans control the Strait of Hormuz. Everything is fine there. You just don't watch the news, don't read the news, close your eyes and try to believe Donald Trump. The Strait of Hormuz is under full US control. But for some reason, ships don't pass through there at all, and those that do only go through the Iranian route." Why is that? If the strait is under US control, Trump doesn't explain. Third, the war is spreading. Even during the pause, Iran's neighbors report new drone attacks. Iranian proxy forces, Yemeni Houthis, and pro-Iranian militias in Iraq continue to strike Saudi Arabia. So, a pause in strikes on Iran itself does not mean peace in the region. On the contrary, Iran is using this pause to step up the activity of its proxy forces in the region. At the same time, Donald Trump himself makes it clear that the pause will not last forever. He stated that he is ready for decisive military action if the negotiations fail. Also, remember, he said this on Friday too. That means the bombings haven't been completely cancelled. According to him, they've just been put on pause with the threat of resuming. On the other hand, we've heard such threats from Trump dozens of times already, and every time nothing happens. And at the end of the episode, just a couple of words about why all this directly concerns Ukraine. There are 2 key points here. The first is the shortage of interceptor missiles. This whole story with the pause in the war started because the US is running out of air defense missiles. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, America has used up to half of its stockpiles of some key interceptors. And Patriot interceptors are exactly what Ukraine uses to shoot down Russian ballistic missiles that strike Ukrainian cities. Every missile fired over the Persian Gulf is a missile that Ukraine won't have. And Trump used them there by the hundreds. The second point is the Russian connection. According to CNN, Zelensky said on Sunday that Russia is providing Iran with intelligence for attacks on American military facilities in the Middle East. Here's the quote. "Since the beginning of July, we have been observing active satellite surveillance by Russia over the territories of the Persian Gulf countries and the US military facilities located there. Subsequently, these images end up in Iran." In other words, the Moscow-Tehran connection is working directly against the US. And that's a strong argument for Kyiv in talks with Trump today. And it's already known that at the closed meeting between Trump and Zelensky, the issue of Iran was also discussed, and the issue of threats from Iran towards Russia, Ukraine. The bottom line, the war between the US and Iran has been put on pause, but it's not over. Trump cancelled the massive attack not because things were going well, but because the generals warned that ammunition was running out, and there was almost nothing left to bomb. Instead of bombs, Washington is betting on Operation Economic Fury, meaning sanctions and a naval blockade, which, according to American officials, should scare Tehran more than missiles. They say Iran can no longer pay its fighters. It faces a banking panic and a gasoline shortage. Basically, they're now counting on social unrest. But this strategy comes at a price. Sanctions work over months, not days. And the Hormuz Strait remains closed, Oil and gasoline prices in the US go up, and all this puts pressure on the Republicans ahead of the midterm elections. Iran denies any negotiations with the Americans, keeps the Hormuz Strait closed, and continues the war in the region through its proxy forces. And Trump threatens to resume strikes if the negotiations fail. Those are the very negotiations that in fact do not exist. In short, there's a pause for now, and as for what will happen tomorrow, I think even Trump himself has no idea and is just acting based on the situation, not following any particular strategy. And that's a very bad conclusion to draw from this war. If the war is being waged without a strategy and decisions are made purely based on the situation, it will end very badly for the one who started this war. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support this YouTube channel, I would appreciate your support. You can do this by making any financial donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all. Take care of yourself. Goodbye, everyone.